thank you. And thank you for that shout out to our More for Kids charity. We do a lot of work with that, and we're so excited as to how it's helped build our community. So another thing that we do, of course, is the Missoula Housing Report. This is a report we put out on an annual basis, and we combine with different groups throughout the community that deal with housing. The Missoula Housing Authority, Homeward, the university, and of course the Missoula Organization of Realtors, who we have access to the multiple listing service through our organization. And the idea is to produce a fair, unbiased look at housing and demographics in our community. We try very hard to keep it slanted, to keep it not slanted towards any one thing, although each report kind of ends up telling a story. Last year, the big story was homelessness, which really lined up well with the 10-year plan to end homelessness here in Missoula. This year, the discussion or the focus really ended up being on accessibility to housing, and we'll go through that. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk a little bit about the 2015 data. Our 2016 housing report gives full data for the 2015 year, but since we are now about 3/4 of the way through 2016, I'll also give a year-to-date update on our market stats through 2016. So next slide, please. We're going to first talk about our sales data. Next slide. This is from the housing report, these next statistics. The number of homes sold in the Missoula area actually only had a slight uptick in 2015 from 2014 to 1,390. And that was partially due to supply. And you'll see that same kind of supply message happen in the terms of the affordability part. When you look at the median price of homes, starting in 2014, you see that start to jump up pretty quickly. In 2015, the median high was $238,700, which represented a pretty big jump from the year previously. And you'll see year to date that that's even gone up a little bit farther from that point. One of the ways we measure what's happening in the supply, next slide please, is the absorption rate. An absorption rate basically says, okay, we've got 100 listings on the market today. In the last 30 days, we've sold 10. So all other things aside, it would take us 10 months to work through the 100 listings that we have at the moment. It's a really easy way for us to measure what's happening in the market. A normal supply is 6 months. We consider, though, anything between about 3 and 9 months to be within that normal range, and anything over 9 would be a buyer's market, and anything under 3 would be a seller's market, generally speaking. When you look at this statistic here, so this is a chart from the housing report. It's a little hard to read because that upper price point, for 425 and above, is so high back in 2011, even into the 70-month range for working through the inventory that was available, that the rest of them kind of get bunched down into the bottom. But I've got another slide a little farther down that'll show a little bit better how that breakout works. But back in 2011, you're seeing even the other price points in the 10 to 25-month range for supply. So definitely a lot more listings on the market, not as much activity. Through 2015, that number really, really scrunches down. You can hardly even see the differences between the two on this particular chart just because of how they have kind of condensed. Even the 425 and above has come into a more normal market in 2015. So next slide, please. So the City of Missoula building permits is another big one that we track. We talk about development in our housing report, and you can definitely see there this year, or from 2014 to 2015, there was a slight uptick in single-family development. Not a very large one, but a little bit, and anything helps with our supply issues that we've had. Obviously, you can see a huge change from 2012 to 2015 in terms of our multifamily, and that can be mostly attributed to the apartment buildings that have gone up recently. I know we've all seen them on every single corner. And there's been a lot of discussion, I'm sure, in all of our groups and businesses about, are we overbuilding? What's happening with that? And I've got some more information from the Western Montana chapter of the National Association of Residential Property Managers. They track some of the rental data that will kind of give you some perspective on that in just a minute. But in the meantime, the Housing Affordability Index is another big measure that we use to kind of gauge the health of our market. It basically, one more slide, sorry. It gauges the affordability by determining if a family or person earning the median income can afford a median-priced home. An index value of 100 means that they have the income available to do so, and assuming the family is spending no more than 25% of their income on housing, which 25 to 30% of their income is considered a pretty healthy gauge on whether or not you're overspending or you're house poor. The next slide, please. So this one is a little harder to read, but if you look here on the left-hand side, that's for the folks with a 4% down payment. The one on the right is those with a 20% down payment. Most first-time buyers aren't going to be able to come to the table with 20%, so we definitely want to make sure we include both when we're talking about homeownership. The other big difference between 4% and 20% is the mortgage insurance. This is kind of a product from the foreclosure issues that we had a few years ago, that basically, if you don't have enough equity in the home, you pay insurance to cover a potential loss if you foreclose, or if that particular property is foreclosed upon. So if you have over 20% down payment, you don't need to have that mortgage insurance. So if you look at 2015 versus 2014, and I'm just going to look at the 4% down payment number, we've seen a couple different things. First of all, the price of a home went up pretty significantly. Interest rate did increase just a tiny little bit. But more significantly, also, incomes went down a little bit according to HUD. And so if you are a 4-person household with a 4% down payment, you've only got 77% of the income required to pay for a median-priced home in 2015. In fact, the only category here that can afford a median-priced home is a 4-person household with a 20% down payment. And unless you probably already own a property, that's not going to be as likely, I'm guessing, to be able to do that unless you get some sort of inheritance or gift or something along those lines. If at the very, very bottom there, you've got the median income needed to purchase a median-priced home. With a 4% down payment, you need about $81,000 in income to be able to afford a median-priced home. If you've got 20% down, you need $57,000 in income. So different compared to some of the median incomes we hear about our community and our job force. So next slide, please. We're going to talk about the rental market a little bit, go back to that multifamily development. Next slide. So again, these are from the NARPM, Western Montana chapter of NARPM. This is the rental vacancy rates by quarter. The chart on the far right is the annual average, and you see a little bit of an uptick for the annual average between 2014 and 2015, but it's not very significant. It's still holding at about 4%. The national average for rental vacancy is 5 and 6%. So had we not been doing this development, we probably would be facing a pretty significant rental crisis right now. So something interesting, and that also feeds kind of into the rental prices. Next slide, please. The only category, so a 4-bedroom multiplex and a studio house, both very rare properties, I would assume, have seen a small decrease in rent. But the only other one that saw a decrease in rent is the 2-bedroom multiplex. But it's very, very slight. Only $767 is the actual rent. I'd have to look back at what it was last year. But it's a very small decrease overall. And that's one of the categories that's been built quite a bit. So it kind of makes sense that that one saw a little bit of a reduction. But considering how much building we've seen, it's kind of surprising that it's not a little bit more than that. So we will go on to the next slide. We're going to talk about the market update year to date. I don't have any rental information for this particular update, but I do have just market stat information. So next slide. So this is that absorption rate that we talked about a little bit earlier, broken out a little bit more. There's not a lot of properties obviously listed under $150,000, and the condition of those properties may be questionable. So we've seen about a 4-month absorption rate on that particular item. Otherwise, I mean, we're talking 1.8 months, 1.5 months, 3.12 months in absorption for anything under $300,000, which is a really, really, really small absorption rate, very much a seller's market here in our community. The total market absorption rate is 2.36%, again, below that 3%, which is a low threshold kind of average for what you might call a seller's market. And the total number of listings on the MLS right now in residential from the city of Missoula is only 347. Back probably about 40, the last time I looked, it was about 40% down from 2010. No, 2011. I went back 5 years. So pretty significant difference in terms of supply. And any of the agents out there actually working it can kind of attest to this particular trend. It's definitely more difficult to find homes out there in the rental or in the market. The interesting thing to hear is that the 425 and above, which has historically been even a little bit out of the kind of into the buyer's market category, it is now fully within a normal range. So, next slide, please. This is that absorption rate again with the lines between about 3 and 9%. We are a seasonal market because of weather. It's pretty often that we see the fall and winter, you start to see the trend or the supply build and build and build, and you can kind of see that little wave there. What you'll notice is in the first and second quarter of 2016, right towards the end of that chart, there was no bump. We didn't see any supply buildup, and so throughout this winter, spring, and summer now, we have kind of been dealing with that. There hasn't been a lot of supply, and it's remained low throughout. Next slide, please. So year-to-date for us is about 1,021 sales, and that's about a 3% increase from last year, which is actually a little bit surprising. We've seen a little bit of movement in the last month. The last time I pulled this number, it was only a 1% increase. So in the last month, we've seen some transaction history. The median price is up 5.6% since last year to $254,000. And we've only got 2.36 months of listed supply at this moment, as of the 11th. So next slide, please. So this is an interesting chart. When somebody's purchasing a home, one of the things, what should we offer is kind of one of the first questions, or buying a home, that's probably one of the first questions that an agent gets. What should we offer? So back in 2010, 2011, and 12, you were able to offer 8% below asking price and be reasonably assured you might get that property depending on what the price was on average. Last year it was at 97%. This year it's at 99%. So especially depending on which price point, we're seeing multiple offers, we're seeing cash offers, we're seeing offers above asking as a pretty normal part of the transaction. So next slide, please. So this one is, this is new construction sales. So I don't have the permit data, but this is new construction sales. So you can definitely see that year to date, we are at 71 sales right now, and if you project that out, we'll probably be about 100 sales for new construction properties. The good news is it's increasing. The bad news is it increasing fast enough? We know we don't have as many developers out there putting shovels down and kind of building that new supply, but there are some projects that we know are coming forward, and we hope that those will make somewhat of a difference. So looking forward, next slide, please. So some of the good stuff. Despite the tough supply, we are still seeing an increase in the number of sales happening throughout our community. If you are selling your property, you're probably really enjoying this market right now. New construction is making gains, albeit slowly, and the top-end supply is finally within the realm of normal. So the challenge is buyers are frustrated. If you're looking for a house that's $250,000, you're probably competing with a lot of different people looking for that same home, and you're having to make sacrifices that you don't want to make. And that definitely is creating some frustration in the market. Interest rates for the last 5 years have been supposed to go up. We don't know if they will, but they keep saying it. And we don't know how that's going to affect the market if they do. Lack of affordability and attainability is a big issue. And then just lack of options generally on the market. So if interest rates do go up and if the pricing keeps going up at this rate, will it actually keep that demand? I mean, that's the big question. At some point, are we going to start pricing these folks out of the Missoula real estate market generally? So next slide. The full report, I have given you guys all the Homesteader, which basically has kind of an abbreviated version of the housing report with some basic statistics. If you want the full report, it's available to download online at missoularealestate.com/market-trends, and we also update monthly statistics there. And of course, feel free to call me or email me if you've got any questions.
Thank you very much, Ruth. As is often the case in my experience, it's really not about us or me, it's about the governor of the great state of Montana. The Honorable Steve Bullock is joining us, ladies and gentlemen. This is the place.
Well, this is power actually getting to sit.
Yeah, Jim Nugent usually sits there. So if you'd like to whisper in my ear about the things I'm doing wrong during the course of the event, Governor, feel free to do that. So ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who don't recognize him because you've never actually turned on a television or left your home, this is Steve Bullock. He is the governor of the state of Montana, a friend of mine who cares about many of the same things that we all care about. We care about education, taking care of families, making sure that people have good lives in our communities all day long. And he is here to offer, during the course of a very busy schedule, his perspective on housing issues around the state. He's dialed into these questions and pays a great deal of attention through the Montana Department of Commerce, which is where the State Board of Housing lives. He also listens to people on a regular basis about what's going on in their lives and attempts to work with the legislature to move the needle in a positive direction for the folks he serves. With that, Governor, welcome to the city of Missoula.
Thanks for letting me be a part of today. Thanks also for what you all have chosen to do. Leadership Helena for me was in, I think, 1997, and what's amazing in some respects is 20 years later, still bump into folks from my class. And I think whether you are in government, a nonprofit service, in the private sector, in education, whatever it might be, taking the time to get a better sense of your community beyond the lane in which you live is significant. So thanks for doing it. And the issue that this panel that I got to just parachute in on is an issue, though, that's not unique to Missoula, the city, or the county. I mean, it was when it came to affordable housing, we were in Havre, weren't we, Andrea, when we launched or opened up a new affordable housing unit for folks there. I was just earlier today speaking to the Economic Development Director for Richland County in Sydney. She said on the one hand, as oil prices dropped, we all got to take a breath, but on the other hand, now if you go out to our RV parks and everything else, they're now again full. Or you could go to Big Sky as yet one other example where what their growth is constrained by most is making sure that they have affordable housing for folks who would want to work there. A woman named Sheila Rice has said to me time and time again that homes are where jobs go at night to sleep. And if you really think about that, if you want a vibrant community and economy, if you can't meet that base level of housing needs, it does become so much more difficult. I think when we address these issues in part, that it is one of those where it really can be a public-private partnership. And the mayor alluded to that in some respects, that it takes a broad coalition of folks to figure out how to address affordable housing issues. On the state side, and it's with your dollars, right, with taxpayer dollars, there are a number of things that certainly happen. A lot of housing-related programs. One of the most significant in terms of incentivizing construction of affordable rental housing is the tax credit program through the Montana Board of Housing. But to recognize sort of the need for this, 2017, the Board of Housing received record number of applications, 19 in all, the proposed 633 units statewide, which would have been $87 million in requests for tax credits. It's $60 million more than we had in the program to allocate, which really shows what the high demand is. Now, when all is said and done, $27 million in tax credits creates about 225 new housing units and another $40 million into Montana's construction industry. So that's one way that we address it. Another way that we address it, board uses bonding to provide first-time homeowners with low-interest loans. Now, that's only, though, addressing about 500 Montanans each and every year. Department of Commerce also administers rental assistance, generally known as Section 8 programs, help low-income Montanans pay the rent. Department has seen increased utilization. We're now serving about 8,000 families each and every year. Department of Commerce also helps Board of Housing with service actually mortgages in-house, then providing in-state loan servicing to about 4,600 families. You'll also see in a community, and you certainly see it in this community, I mean, the Missoulian article about what affordable housing is kind of strikes a chord with so many folks too. And one thing that, especially with our legacy citizens, our senior citizens, housing prices get more and more challenging in that respect. We have had in Montana, I think it's $1,500, is that the senior renter and homeowner tax credit? Do you know? Oh, good. All right, then I'm just going to say it's $1,500. But that's something that in our overall tax code then that we've tried to say, and it's been for quite a while, how do you try to ease the burden a little bit on our seniors in Montana? And we are becoming more and more, more quickly over time, one of the grayer states in the nation. But we actually provide incentives and to try to help keep them in their homes when it comes to tax credits in that respect. But, it's a funny thing because from where I sit, look, we got more people working than ever before in our state's history. We have 8,000 job openings in our state right now. We have real challenges with affordable housing. On the one hand, in my seat, I'd so much rather that be the case than okay, well, there's no places to go for jobs, or that the markets are so significantly depressed that we have apartment buildings that are empty as opposed to building things like that. But looking in the future, going back to what Sheila Rice says, right? Homes are where jobs go to sleep at night. We're not going to be able to address a lot of these things unless you come together. And it really is a coming together, because it's not private contractors alone that are ever going to just address the affordable housing issues. There has to be some incentivizing, especially when you're looking at low-income housing. I think we do it in part, but the need for it the demand is so much more significant than either dollars that we provide at the state level or incentives that are provided through credits and things like that, from my perspective at least. That's all I had. And I could answer any questions too.
Well, the governor has offered to answer questions. Anyone in the audience have a question they'd like to answer? Gee, this feels like a council meeting, weirdly.
Only if they're going to be yelling at me, Mayor. Yeah, either questions on housing or what the heck, darn near anything.
And for the sake of the fact that we are actually recording this on MCAT for posterity, if you have a question, if you wouldn't mind just coming to that table, there was a microphone there that will pick you up. You don't even need to pick the microphone up.
Anybody else?
And if that...
It better be a good one now that we know that it's being recorded too. And tell who you are and where you work and things like that.
I'm Scott Kessler. I work at Northwest Farm Credit Services here in Missoula. I guess my question, and you might know the answer to this more than the governor does, but in other states that I've lived and visited in, there seems to be a lot more speculative housing development when you see absorption rates like the rates that you just showed. That offers a lot of incentive for a developer to come in and get to work and build those houses. Why don't we see that in the state of Montana, especially here in the Missoula area? What's prohibiting those developers from coming in here?
It's a loaded question. There are a number of different things. Yeah.
Didn't mean to turn you.
Oh, that's all right. You just want me talking. So there are a number of different things at play. Right now, we know that we have approved subdivisions. We know that the lots are there and ready to go. There's probably an issue accessing financing, or the approved lots no longer are what is needed in the market to sell, so that particular developer hasn't moved forward. We have heard concerns over the subdivision process and how timely and risky that is, especially in the Missoula community, although the mayor has done quite a bit through our development services to help improve that. In terms of the speculation piece of it, it's kind of a double-edged sword. So because we didn't have that speculation, our recession and our housing crisis wasn't nearly as deep as it was in other parts of the country. In fact, I mean, we were down, I think our median low was about 190, which was only $30,000 difference between the high. It wasn't significant. It was significant for if you owned a home, but it wasn't, and it has recovered so quickly after that. So that speculation has protected us, but it also, right now where we're dealing with these supply issues, there are so many reasons why we're not seeing that kind of investment yet. I do think some of it's coming through the recession. I think some of our workforce, our construction workforce, went over to the Bakken. And now that those jobs are kind of starting to be scaled back a bit, hopefully we'll see some of them back in our communities and ready to get to work building again. But a lot of that is just speculation.
And I'll just briefly piggyback. I've been involved in local government since 2002. And the number of approved subdivisions we did prior to the recession produced probably 5,000 or so entitled lots within the city of Missoula that are available and ready to go. So that capacity is more or less out there in the form of subdivision. What I think we've seen change is the nature of the marketplace. Location matters, I think, in ways that it may not have before. And I also think that people enthusiasm was considerably tempered by the recession. It was a tough time for a lot of people, and I think folks are being a little bit more careful with regard to what they build, where they build, how they build, and what they buy and how they buy it.
Thank you.
Other questions for the governor that others can answer?
Can I ask a question?
Mr. Oakes? Sure.
Hey. Governor, I'm Bob Oakes. I work with North Missoula Community Development Corporation and also with Trust Montana, and we have a community land trust program for home ownership. And I know that there is statutorily empowered a housing trust fund in the state, but I don't believe it's ever found funding.
Yeah.
So do you have any ideas on how that could change?
Well, I think that, the interesting thing in some respects, the Sheila Rice, who I quote at the start, who really has been a rock star, she's a former legislator, she's out of Great Falls. She is a rock star when it comes to affordable housing issues. It was even last legislative session where she was proposing with the coalition, I think it was a $40 million funding of a trust to deal with housing issues. And it's always a challenge. I know that that's an insufficient answer, but always a challenge to turn around and ensure that either legislators would think that this is the priority where we should be investing the money. And it's something that is, I sat down with Sheila a number of times as we both put together a budget. She was disappointed that we didn't have an amount like that in for the budget, for my base budget, proposed budget. But it's also then the competing needs of saying, well, everybody says, well, okay, well, we need to be investing in infrastructure. Just but one example. Where's the best dollar? Hopefully we ultimately sort it out through a legislative process, how the money is best spent. But I think as you're seeing more and more of the challenges with affordable housing, and when it becomes not just an urban-rural divide, meaning that there are challenges in our oil-producing communities and things like that, that there becomes a more greater likelihood that the trust would be funded.
Mayor, if I just suggest that our nonprofit and public folks who are here, that we just give them a chance to introduce themselves. I will, in addition to taking questions. They don't introduce themselves at all.
Fantastic. Happy to do that. Yeah. Aaron, would you like to begin?
My name's Erin Pahan, and I am with the city's Office of Housing and Community Development.
My name's Adam Ragsdale. I'm the Operations Director for the Missoula Housing Authority.
Good afternoon. My name is Andrea Davis, and I'm with Homeward. We're headquartered here in Missoula.
Hi, I'm Adam Hertz. I am a realtor and real estate developer, former city council member, and I'm here on behalf of Habitat for Humanity as board president.
And Bob Oakes with North Missoula Community Development Corporation, director of that, and also president of Trust Montana. And Sheila Rice is the treasurer of Trust Montana. So.
And the governor just leaned into me to apologize for hogging the stage and getting in front of everybody. And
They all know a lot more about these issues than me, so be having them speak rather.
yeah, that'll happen. That'll happen. What's your schedule?
I think, what's that? 20 minutes, so I could certainly listen to others.
Oh, you have additional time? Fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah.
We need to get you out of here by when? 3?
3 o'clock.
Fantastic. Fantastic. I'm glad to do that. Well, I will give some brief remarks, Governor, and then we'll let the panelists have at it. The short version is that, as Natalie and Leslie suggested, I've been thinking about housing issues since 2006 when I first became mayor of the city of Missoula, and trying to move that needle has been extraordinarily challenging to the point that it occurred to me that it wasn't going to happen unless we had some additional energy and resources committed to this effort at the city of Missoula, which is why I asked the city council as a matter of course during our budget deliberations for fiscal year 17 to include a housing and community development director. That person is Aaron Pahan. Aaron comes to us from extensive work experience in all manner of HUD-related issues. She's a former director of the Poverello Center, and she gets it all day long. And since Erin came to work for us about 2 months ago, she has been working diligently every day, talking with for-profit, nonprofit housing developers, as well as putting together an office, making sure that we have a smooth transition from the work that we've been doing on a contract basis for many years with Missoula County, and helping us talk about policy, procedures, goals, and objectives to ensure that every citizen of the city of Missoula is adequately housed. Fundamentally, I believe that housing is a human right. Fundamentally, I believe that you can't have a thriving community if folks are left out. Fundamentally, I believe that you have to have full belly and a roof over your head, access to health care, education, and transportation in order to fully participate in your community, and housing is a critical component of that full participation. So Aaron is on board to help us get that done, and we have a number of resources that we bring to bear from the city of Missoula to make that happen. Some of those are federal resources, some of those are state resources, and some of those resources come from within the community through our redevelopment agency and a program called tax increment financing. We believe that with proper policy, with intentionality, that is, if we plan for housing, if we make intentional choices about the way we direct resources, we are actually going to make a difference in the way people are housed, where they're housed, how they're housed, and affordability. It's a hill to climb, but you can only start climbing a hill by taking a step, and Aaron is one of those steps we have taken. Anecdotally, I will tell you that having lived in Missoula now, these 52 years, and I'm well preserved for that. I mean, really. Maybe not really. I see Candace Reinhold here, a friend from high school that I haven't seen for ages. She's much more well preserved than I am, so it's nice to see you, Candace. My wife and I bought our first home in Missoula in 1997. It cost us $98,000, which was all the money in the world. It was a 3-bedroom home in the Rattlesnake Valley. We sold it 19 years later in 3 days for $345,000. The best thing I've ever done. Happy accident, like most of mine, but the fact of the matter is that home ownership is one of the ways that we build equity and wealth and stability in our lives, and I want others to have that chance. I didn't actually need to make all that money on the house. I think there are some limited equity models that start to make sense in our community that we can talk about. But the fact of the matter is that I want everyone to have those opportunities to live in a safe place that they enjoy, that provides them access to the things they need and a life that matters. And that's what all of us want and deserve. And that's why we talk about housing a lot at the City of Missoula. That's why realtors do what they do. That's why bankers do what they do. And that's why governors do what they do, is to make sure that we're taking care of people. So with that, our first speaker today, she introduced herself earlier. She is a friend and a great community leader. Andrea Davis is the director of Homeward, which chips away at affordable housing and has done so in Missoula for a very long time. She also, in her copious spare time, has agreed to serve on Missoula's Urban Transportation Board, so she's taking care on a volunteer basis of folks who wish to travel through transit in Missoula. Andrea.
Thank you, Mayor Engen. So again, my name is Andrea Davis, and I work for Homeward, which is a nonprofit organization that develops housing, and then we also are a regional homeownership center. We develop housing around the state of Montana. The vast majority of our work, however, is here in this lovely city of Missoula. And then our regional homeownership center is here in Missoula, located in our Solstice building, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. At the corner of Russell and Broadway, we have a redevelopment there where we built 2 different facilities. One is mixed use, includes our offices and offices of others, and a whole myriad of financing that went into that. I'm really happy to be the first speaker while the governor's here. First, to honestly to give you credit, Governor, for the work that you've done to recognize the value of affordable housing around the state. This is an issue, and I want to give credit to the organizers of this day, Government and Politics Day, which was our day too. We're alumni, Leadership Missoula, right here. That's right. That you're recognizing this as an issue that we need to talk about, and it needs to be a much greater conversation than just the few people that are actively involved in it every day for their jobs. One of the ways that we have chosen to talk about this is that it's really about housing that people can afford. The term affordable housing often stigmatizes the issue. Affordable housing, right? Many of you are like, oh, people that don't work, people that are seniors that are on fixed incomes, people that could try harder. I mean, I'm just gonna say that we all have natural biases, and I do too, it exists. But when we put it in a context of saying housing that people can afford, I think then we realize that this is a much more neutralized issue that affects a whole range, all of us actually. All of us as people that live and work every day, all of us that employ people, all of us that have their senior parents that we're trying to figure out what to do with them in their 70s and 80s and 90s. And so one of the things that the governor did as part of his Main Street Montana program was he organized key industry networks, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with that process, and I was lucky enough to participate in the housing and construction KIN. And I, along with Sheila Rice, we worked on, along with a lot of private contractors, engineers, all from around the state, we came together, and we talked about what are some of these issues that are affecting housing that people can afford. And a lot of issues. Infrastructure is one of them. Workforce, good workforce, that people actually moving into the construction trades. I can tell you as a developer, that's a big concern for me. We've had projects that have had some very risky situations due to lack of skilled labor. That inevitably makes the housing more affordable, more costly for us as developers. And ultimately, those costs, we can either lose that housing out of the stock, or those costs can be borne by the people that are living in those units. So there's issues with that. I guess my point there being that this is a very large topic to talk about, but it's important that we talk about all the ways that it influences the affordability of housing. We came in agreement to 4 different issues and recommendations that we put forward to the governor. One of those was funding the Housing Trust Fund. We do have a statutorily created budget line item that, and never in the fund's history has the legislature chose to fund that out of the general fund. And it's bigger than the governor, right? Because there's an entire legislative body that has to agree towards the funding priorities. One of the things that I would beg and of you is that you contact me afterwards or I send information. We have organized around the state a Montana Housing Coalition that is trying to raise this issue at the legislative level, because it is not, I mean, I'm talking to the choir here, right? I'm an affordable housing provider. I show up to the legislature and they're like, yeah, we know that you think you have an issue. But the reality is, we're trying to develop a property in Livingston right now, and we're applying to the Board of Housing for housing tax credits. I have had multiple restaurants come to me and business owners in Livingston who have had to either shut down 1 day a week or went from a 5-page menu to a 2-page menu because they cannot find workforce to live in Livingston. And every situation in every community is a little bit different. You know, Livingston's 6,500 people. So what's happened there recently is the short-term rental phenomenon is really affecting that market in a more significant way than it's affecting our market here, right? In Missoula, we have a very different market, and we can absorb the VRBO and Airbnb phenomenon. But in Livingston, they can't. And all single-family and multifamily units basically have been absorbed into this phenomenon, and there is nowhere for the workforce to live in Livingston. And because the Bozeman market is on fire, we looked at statistics today, but as Ruth well knows, in the month of July, our median home price purchase was $260,000. Bozeman is $360,000. It's dramatic. It's dramatic here. It's dramatic in Bozeman.
And you have to live in Bozeman.
And you have to live in Bozeman. I know. So I guess my point, I don't know what my point is other than just me rattling on. I encourage you as business owners and people that are involved in the Missoula employer world to help us out, because we can't do this by ourselves, to start to see some changes happen. And I want to give credit to the mayor, because what he did in terms of creating a housing department and staffing a position is exactly what we need to do. I encourage us to do the same thing at the state level. That was another recommendation that we put forward in our Key Industry Network and the Main Street Montana business plan. And that's because we need intentionality and we need focused resources. A quick example I'll share with you is we're developing a property at the Old Sawmill District, which is down by the river. We're developing 27 units. It's a drop in the bucket. Beautiful, however. I'm excited to announce when it opens in the spring. We'll start leasing up in December. We partnered with the city of Missoula that through the Missoula Redevelopment Agency, they bought the property and they sold it back to us for half of the price. Well, that helped us out 2 ways. It helped reduce the cost of land, which tax credits don't pay for. Little nuance, but when you're working on a financial pro forma, it makes big difference. And I was able to then say, our local government has reduced the cost of land, and it allowed me to go out and get a $300,000 private grant, because that made a difference to me to compete in a 13-state region. It makes all the difference in the world. So when we have localities and the state put real money on the table, we can leverage a whole lot more, because most of all the resources we provide to build the housing we do in terms of deed-restricted affordable housing comes from outside of the state of Montana. It does not necessarily come from here. So we can take a little bit of that local money and we can leverage the heck out of it and do a lot more. One thing I'll just point out, I don't know if folks had a chance to look at this, but we have a cost of living activity worksheet. You'll just see a discrepancy. I have a $900 average rent per 2-bedroom. That came out of our market study that we had done recently about the housing project I had just done. Statistically, we probably have some of our statistics off. If you remember, Roos was like 750. Homewards units are also in that number. So we have affordable units. We just brought that average down. This $900 is the average of the market rent. And the reason that I handed this out to you today was so you have an example of somebody that's earning $10 an hour but working full-time. This gives a really good illustration of if they are going to pay $900 a month for rent, and maybe that's paying $750 a month and then paying absorbent utilities. In this example, we said they're still paying $100 of utilities. You make the choice on where you're going to spend the rest of your $350. Is it going to be on your college loans? Is it going to be kids? Is it going to be animals? Is it going to be a car payment? Is it going to be health care? All of those choices, which are substantial, this just helps illustrate a lot of what our lower earning folks in our Missoula market are facing every day. Okay, I'll stop.
Thank you, Andrea. Love Andrea. She just spoke about 15 times longer than I'm allowed to have people speak. So, just, I'm teasing you. Note to others, and I'm trying not to enforce the 3-minute rule here. I really get tired of doing that, actually. With that, I am happy to introduce Adam Hertz. Adam sat at this table many a Monday evening and a Wednesday afternoon serving citizens of Missoula from Ward 2 as a Missoula City Councilman. He is currently running for a seat in the Montana legislature. He is a real estate agent here in the city of Missoula, and in his copious spare time volunteers for Habitat for Humanity, which has a unique, long-standing model for providing affordable housing to our friends and neighbors. Mr. Hertz.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and nice to be back at the table here with you. Nice to see you, and thanks to all our panel members, and thanks to Governor Bullock for joining us today. Just make this real quickly and touch on what Habitat for Humanity of Missoula does. We share a lot of similarities with other affordable housing developers, but we're also quite a lot different. Our core mission is the elimination of poverty housing, which is not unlike almost everyone at the table here today, but our organization is a lot more complex than that too. We're a nonprofit Christian housing ministry, and we're dedicated to the elimination of poverty housing, not just in our community, but through Habitat International, the elimination of poverty housing throughout the world. Our core principles are to demonstrate the love of Jesus Christ, focus on shelter, advocate for affordable housing, promote dignity and hope, and to support sustainable and transformational development, and we've seen a lot of that transformational development happening in Missoula, and Habitat has been proud to be a part of that. So we are in the business of much more than just advocating for and developing affordable housing, but certainly that's a big piece of what we do. And part of our ministry is really the It Takes a Village model. We have hundreds of volunteers working on generally 2 houses a year that are not given to low-income families, but sold to low-income families at cost, sometimes with a subsidy, and with a 0% mortgage. So in short, that's what we do, and I've been asked to address a question. I don't know if we're addressing that question now or as panelists, but the question was, what's the most critical issue that needs to be addressed in order to make housing more affordable for everyone in Missoula County? And that's such a huge question, and to narrow it down to one critical issue is really difficult. We've had a lot of discussion at the board level with this. You know, our executive director, Noreen Humes, has added some perspective, and I'll speak both to that, to our board discussions, and a little bit of my experience as a realtor and real estate developer. But really, kind of the short version touches on 3 items, and that's that our community is really challenged by the lack of inventory of affordable, developable, and platted buildable land. As the mayor mentioned, there's a lot of entitled lots. Many of them aren't actually buildable, though, is the issue. The second is the lack of availability of existing single-family housing and new construction, and that really, a lot of that goes back to that inventory of land shortage. And then finally, the growing gap between wages and the cost of housing, and I think Ruth did an excellent job of touching on that. In Missoula, in 2015, City Lab released an interesting piece, you can find it online, called Mapping Where American Workers Spend the Most on Housing. And interestingly, Missoula was considered one of the expensive surprises in that report. So as much as we can point to the high cost of housing, that's only half of that ratio. The other part of that is wages, and that's whole nother discussion for a whole nother day. So with that, thanks a lot. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Adam. Next, we have Adam Ragsdale, who slaves away at the Missoula Housing Authority. Housing Authority delivers federal programming dollars and access to citizens we serve, and always has a waiting list. Adam?
Yes, we do always have a waiting list. To start off on that, I guess, our waiting list annually sits anywhere from 1,500 to 2,000 families. And it's a list that's updated every year. So every year it drops a little bit, and then by the end of the year it grows back to that, over 2,000 families area. We currently own and manage over 600 affordable and subsidized housing units between our public housing and our tax credit housing. We also administer over 774 Section 8 or Housing Choice vouchers. We also have over 100 Shelter Plus Care vouchers, which are for homeless individuals in Missoula. And we do also have various programs for homeless individuals as well. We have our Shelter Plus Care program, obviously, is a great example. We also have the Uptown Apartments, which is a SRO, single-room occupancy model that is just across the street over here, and that provides housing for homeless individuals. We also partner with the YWCA to provide some housing for domestic violence victims, and we also have a transitional housing program called the Valor House that provides housing for homeless vets as well. With the Housing Authority, one of the things that I think we hear a lot is, oh, you guys are HUD housing. That's all you're doing is just your HUD, your public housing. People even locally will get confused. Someone once recently thought that the Palace was public housing. That's tax credit. That's a whole different ball of wax. So one of the things that we like to try and do is to get out and educate folks as to what all we do. There's a lot of different things that we do. We obviously do have the public housing and the Section 8. Those are both of our subsidized housing options. We also do tax credit housing as well. We have them scattered around town. We also have a development and construction wing within our organization where when we have projects that we're working on currently, one of our senior housing projects, River Ridge Apartments, is undergoing a remodel, and we have our staff person in our construction wing that is taking that project on. So we do a lot of different types of things. It's not just one thing, but we are not fair housing and we are not legal services. We get a lot of those phone calls too, and we always make those referrals to the proper agencies. So.
Thank you, Adam. What would you say, Adam, is the single most critical issue that needs to be addressed in order to attain housing affordability and access in Missoula?
Well, with a waiting list that we have of over 2,000 families, I'd say the amount of affordable housing is a challenge, and funding in order to build those. Those are certainly critical steps. The governor said that there was it 27 million for the tax credit program this year? We needed a lot more than that in order to be able to fund all of the great programs that we're applying for housing. There's a lot of worthy organizations out there that put in applications year in and year out, and you just don't get funded because it's a tough thing to get into. It's a difficult area when you don't have the funding streams for it.
Thank you, sir. Aaron Pahan joined us a couple of months ago, all the way from the Poverello down the road, a completely non-controversial project that allowed her to segue into the quiet life here at the city of Missoula. Aaron is a licensed clinical social worker, a problem solver, and a great addition to the community, and her job is to fix it all. With that, Aaron.
You usually add within the next 48 hours, so I'm...
Thank you. Governor.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Governor, thanks. Great to have Governor Bullock here, a man of the people. Aaron.
Thanks. Well, Ruth did, I think, a excellent job of really explaining the landscape right now to you guys in Missoula, and of course, the mayor always does a brilliant job of talking about our vision and our intent in the Office of Housing and Community Development. So I'll just share briefly how we're going to get there. The governor stated that this really can be a public-private partnership, and I would go so far as to say it absolutely has to be a public-private partnership. We do have hopes of seeing the state Housing Trust Fund funded through the legislative process, but we also know that federal funds are decreasing every year, and so what that means is we have to get more creative locally about how we address housing and what that looks like for us. Our office will be focused on developing housing policy that is reflective of that public-private partnership and the need for a really diverse group of individuals to be involved both in the development and in the implementation. So our nonprofit partners at Homeward and MHA and HRDC and other places, NeighborWorks here in town, private developers, and then also our partners in finance who are helping us really look at some sophisticated models of how we're going to finance these types of projects moving ahead. I think before we're ready to draw that map, though, we really need to better understand the need. I think we have some base numbers in terms of where we lack supply, absorption rates you all saw there, but we also know that it's not quite as simple as looking at our housing inventory. I think it also has a lot to do with the market demand. We can build 200 more single-family homes and work with a spec developer on that. But that's really not going to meet the need for 65-year-olds who want to sell their home and downsize into a condo or a townhouse. We also have a new generation of millennials who is really looking for a more urban experience, connected to trails, 15 minutes by foot to grocery stores and parks. And so I think we really need to understand the market demand and what our community is looking for in housing, in addition to how many units we need to develop of housing. And so I think that's a process that we're all going to partner and work together on so that when we build that map, it's a map that we can follow for several years as we kind of work to address the housing need in Missoula. I think that we also really need to look at how we approach partnerships and projects moving ahead too, and looking at different models and looking at creative models that are being used across the state. That's the fantastic part about the work that we do is that we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We need to look at what other people are doing that works exceptionally well and figure out what fits for us here in Missoula.
Thank you, Aaron, very much. And last, ladies and gentlemen, but certainly not least, Bob Oakes, representing the North Missoula Community Development Corporation. Bob is a tireless advocate, and I mean advocate, for folks in neighborhoods who have challenges of all sorts. But Bob has been about affordable housing and cracking the nut for a very long time. He is affectionately known as the mayor of the North Side. He is, in my office, has suggested that he's actually the mayor of Missoula, and that I should shut up and just listen. So that's worked well over time as well. Bob is effective, thoughtful, and has tremendous experience in the work he does, and has built some really cool things. Mr. Oakes.
Well, I don't know how to respond to that.
Oh, yes, you do.
I've also been called the king of the North Side, then I get to say heavy is the head that wears the crown. But I bought a house on the North Side in 1988 for $36,000, and I haven't had it appraised recently, but at the time, I was working for Mayflower Movers here in Missoula, and my wife was a medical transcriptionist at St. Pat's. People in those occupations today could not afford to buy a median price or even less house in Missoula, and that's a shame. Of the past 30 years, 20 I've worked as a director of a nonprofit, so owning my own house is certainly the greatest asset that I have. Working for small nonprofits doesn't provide you with the retirement resources you would otherwise need, and I really value having that house now. And actually, believe it or not, 30 years does pass and people can own houses. And it's a wonderful thing to see people be able to do. I noticed in the early 90s, kind of from 93, 94 on, it was increasingly difficult for people in that situation, my economic situation, to be able to buy a house. So we started working on various programs to provide entry-level home ownership for folks. And through then the Northside Neighborhood Association and then the North Missoula Community Development Corporation that was started when I worked for St. Patrick Hospital on a healthy neighborhood project. We work with a no longer existent nonprofit called the Missoula Housing Corporation and provided home ownership opportunity for first-time buyers. And we started that in the North Missoula Housing Partnership in '96, and it went until roughly 2001. And that program worked on $20,000 in down payment, or $20,000 in second mortgage money at 2% and $5,000 in down payment assistance that would be forgiven after 5 years of ownership. That program got about 35 households into housing, but that amount of subsidy stopped being enough to continue that program. So at that point, we, through our Community Development Corporation, examined the problem of how much subsidy would be considered too much subsidy to get people into homes. And what we decided then was to start a community land trust whereby the nonprofit owns the land, has a lease agreement with the homeowner, and then that homeowner is limited in the equity that they can take out when they sell their home. So it keeps homes both place-based and affordable for subsequent buyers. And I think it's a huge investment in the community to do that kind of housing that retains permanent affordability. We have only developed 47 units since we started our community land trust, and but the program has worked. Those have remained affordable. We did our first project in 2002. Those 47 units probably have provided entry-level home ownership to probably closer to 70 households because people resell. But when they resell with the shared equity, they pass along the benefit that they got and the subsidy they got to a second buyer. We are trying to work across the state to promote community land trusts, and we actually Trust Montana is the name of that organization, and Trust Montana actually owns the land under a Habitat for Humanity house in Red Lodge. So there's opportunities for partnership there as well. Red Lodge is like a lot of communities that were mentioned earlier, Big Sky being one of them, kind of the resort community where things are dramatically unaffordable and there is no workforce housing potential there. We used to say in Missoula, when things started to get really expensive, that people would drive until they could afford their mortgage. But then you got really forcing people out of the community. Where you need people, the investment that's going to happen in downtown is wonderful. But if it's not inclusive, then folks who actually work in a lot of occupations downtown won't be able to live very close to their jobs. So that's something I think we need to address. So in terms of the most critical issue is money. There are insufficient resources to develop adequate housing for low and moderate income households. The most critical issue from rising out of that is how do you find that subsidy that's needed? The NMCDC has produced the only publicly subsidized home ownership in Missoula probably for 20 years. There is, I mean, it's not happening, and it's very difficult. The habitat, very dramatically uses private resources, local resources to do it. But we have to deal with the diminishing federal funds. And the biggest problem there that I see, and I think it's something that the new housing division can help and will help do, is how do you generate the political will necessary to find the money locally that we need. The city does its consolidated plan every 4 years, and that really summarizes the problem well there. In most cases, federal funds, this is a quote from the Consolidated Plan Executive Summary, in most cases, federal funds through CDBG and home programs do not meet the needs and must be supplemented through a decreasing pool of other funds. Organizations that provide the means to address the community needs rely on cooperation among agencies, experienced and creative staff, and prioritization of resources to fill the gap left from insufficient funds. Some needs simply are not met at all or are incompletely met. As was mentioned earlier, we are probably $100,000 in median cost behind Bozeman, but I think what's going to happen is that that gap will close. That's what has happened historically. In the 90s, Bozeman was way more expensive than Missoula, and then Missoula started to catch up fairly rapidly. I think that one of the things that's being tried in Bozeman now, we have to take a serious look at, and that's an inclusionary zoning ordinance. Bozeman is doing it now through incentives, but if it doesn't produce enough houses, after several years, it'll go to a mandatory inclusionary housing policy. That would harness the power of the development that's going on in a hot market to produce affordable entry-level homes. And I would recommend to you all to take a look at a new website that's www.inclusionaryhousing.org for some ideas as to what might be able to happen. I think it's a conversation that we should have here. Thanks.
Thank you, Bob. With that, do you all have questions for members of the panel? Or pothole issues? Ollie.
Hi, I'm Molly Stockdale, and I work at Travelers Rest Preservation and Heritage Association. So I actually have the reverse commute. I live in Missoula and commute to Lolo every day. But I think that more and more people are looking for affordable housing outside of Missoula and commuting. But often those families are one car repair away from joblessness and homelessness. And I wanted to get your perspective on the tie between affordable housing and transportation.
And I'll let each panelist address that, and we'll start with Bob.
Our concentration has been on neighborhood housing in Missoula. And I think that what I have seen in other places in terms of housing on transportation lines, and this is especially true in bigger cities, like Seattle, so the housing on the light rail, it's wonderful. I've seen it recently. It's wonderful looking housing, and it's not affordable. And actually, unless there are safeguards built into a system so that there is a requirement that a certain number of the homes that are on light rail lines or mass transit lines or in Lolo, I don't know what an equivalency would be. If there was ever a light rail system to Lolo, you'd want to make sure that housing that was built near it had a certain quotient of affordability to it. I don't think that's a very great answer. I think other folks might know more.
Thanks. So the high school principal just suggested to me that it's not okay for me to force people to answer this question. So if you'd like to answer the question, that way we can have more questions, why don't we do that? Yeah. Who would like to answer?
No, I want to answer
I
this
do,
question.
indeed.
So there is an inextricable connection between transportation costs and housing costs. On average in the United States, Americans pay 50% of their income towards housing and transportation. I don't know what that number is locally, but it's pretty significant. We have a home ownership center. Homeward is a regional home ownership center. We teach the first-time homebuyer education class. So we see people all the time. An interesting little statistic is we just looked at average median income, not average, median income, quite a difference we know statistically. Median income of people that have been taking our class, the incomes have been increasing. It's not because our incomes are increasing greatly in the community, it's because people that are earning more of the median income are having such a hard time finding housing that we are one of the solutions, and people that are earning less than the median income are taking themselves out of the equation. That's our guess. That's what we think is happening. So we see people all the time that come through our homebuyer education class that want a certain kind of home, and they end up purchasing outside of the city. We go through a calculation with them. So if they know where they think they want to live, we help them try to hone in, and there's actually some really interesting websites out there that you can type in like the kind of car you have, the age, the gas mileage, and then where you live. And you can actually calculate your transportation quotient. So we actually go through that calculation to help people understand what out-of-pocket costs they're going to realize if they buy a home in Stevensville and work in Missoula. That said, the financing world does not necessarily take this into consideration. One of the ideas that's been floated out there, and it's not stuck, is creative financing that takes into consideration people living close to transit lines and reducing their dependency on a single vehicle. And if you don't have a car, and you don't have a car payment, and you don't have to pay insurance and gas, you could afford more of a mortgage, right? That math makes sense. But we don't have the financial products to make that available. So that's one challenge.
Transportation efficient mortgages. And
Right.
They have them, and that's something we could perhaps work with local financial institutions to establish. So.
There's been some experiments, but they're not used very readily. It would be something I'd love to see if we could get some local pilot on that. This is one reason that Mountain Line did go fare-free or zero fare, was because of the recognition of the fact that people will use the bus if they can just get on it for free. And our ridership is up 42% in 2 years. It's a dramatic, and those are new users, those are new riders. That's a dramatic increase. There's a whole sense of convenience, and what Bob was speaking to is that we don't have transit-oriented development. We don't have fixed lines in our community, but the more sophisticated we get in our community planning, we can start to talk about how do we have a corridor. Let's talk about Brook Street, because that's something that we're looking at, I would say, as a community, is rebuilding Brook Street into a more urban-oriented and really a 21st century street. I mean, that corridor was built in the 1960s, and boy, does it look and feel like it, right? I mean, I don't really want to ride my bike or walk up and down that street, and it's close to where I live. So we have the opportunity to plan for that area. If we use the bus system as a way to create more of a fixed line, then we could allocate both market rate, and we could allocate a certain amount of parcels along that line that may have to be for certain affordability points. And then developers like Homeward could come in and say, okay, I know I'm going to have some predictability around maybe the land purchase, or a for-profit developer would say, I know I'm going to have a certain number, like sales, right? If I'm going to do a condominium development, it's probably going to sell pretty quickly, knowing that people have that proximity to fixed transit. But we're in a little bit of a dilemma in a rural-ish state where we don't have a lot of transit dollars that come in. So there's a definite connection.
Anyone else want to take a pass at that? All right, other questions? Yes, ma'am.
My name is Grace McCoy, and I'm an accountant at Anderson Zermulin. And Mr. Mayor, this might be a question for you, but for all of you, in hearing what you're saying, it sounds like, this is a big problem affecting many Missoulians, but it sounds kind of like a long game. So what are we doing to help those folks in the next 6 months, the next year, the next 2 years, while we work on, developing more housing, developing more programs, finding more funding, et cetera?
So I think you're absolutely right that this is a long game. And I think we're going to continue to do the things that we've done sort of as a function of making things happen in the short term. So we deploy something on the order of $1 million in CDBG and home funds. We have nonprofit and for-profit developers working on product that meets inventory need. We're working through the redevelopment agency to create unique inventory that I think provides some relief on the pressure on single-family homes. So we're going to have roughly 500 beds in downtown Missoula for student housing by this time next year. That means 500 souls who likely are living in single-family homes, in a bedroom in a single-family home, and renting it for $500 a month or whatever the number is. I think that's going to help. I think the multifamily inventory. So I just got our development report today. This report includes commercial development as well as residential development, but we're about $30 million in value of new development over last year. So we're going to continue to work with these folks kind of on the short-term stuff. The fact of the matter is that unless we begin to address these longer-term issues, we're not going to get anywhere. I just did a back-of-napkin calculation. So we grow at roughly 1.5% a year. If you just take the residents of the city of Missoula, we're going to grow on the order of 1,000 people, 1,050 people a year. So every year, we're falling a little bit further behind in all of that inventory. So when I ask my friends at the Missoula Organization of Realtors, what do you need? Their answer is everything. And I think that's true. I think we do need everything. I also think that we have an opportunity, however, to look at trends in the marketplace and go back to that notion, and I keep using this term, intentionality. So the city of Missoula, as a funding agency, through either these entitlement funds, community development block grants, or home funds, or any of our partner agencies, or through the redevelopment agency, we've always been reactionary, right? We always respond to requests from the marketplace, and those market requests don't always reflect broader community need. And what I'd like to do is make sure that when we have a situation where Andrea comes to me with a homeward project for 37 units, or you name the number of units at a particular site, I want to have the capacity at the city of Missoula to say, love the project, why don't we make it a 300-unit development? Take advantage of economies of scale, take advantage of land prices, take advantage of location and transportation issues, which again I think are critical, and try to make a difference there. A piece of this too is of those 1,000 folks who are joining us every year here at the city of Missoula, and there's certainly attrition. Every year I get older, I recognize that. But the fact of the matter is, at some point, we also want to think about, as we are a graying community, how much do we want to just be gray? Do we want young professionals? Do we want young families? Do we want young folks who are interested in engaging in service jobs involved in this community and able to live and afford a home here, whether that's a rental or an ownership model? How are we a little bit more intentional about creating inventory that matches our community goals as we move forward? We're looking for a large and general balance here. And what we suffer from largely, and thank heavens we don't suffer in the same way that Bozeman, I think, is today, what we suffer from here is a shocking structural imbalance around wages and housing prices. And so what we need to do through policy, practice, and investment are work on ways to shift that imbalance and create balance somehow. And without working on the longer term, we're going to continue to struggle with the short term. So we're going to keep plugging at both of them. I wish I had moved faster. I wish we had moved faster. There's something to be said for not doing this work, however, during a terrible recession. We used that crisis to look at the way we deliver services rather than the way we look at policy. And I think we're now in a position through the way we deliver services through our organization that we can actually take good advantage of plans, resources, and talent. Boy, I'm long-winded.
Thank you. I think we have about 5 minutes left, so I just want to give everyone on the panel an opportunity to give our group kind of one last message of what we can do. Because I know a lot of folks here probably believe the same thing as you, that housing should be something that everyone has access to. So just really quickly, what we can do as citizens of the city of Missoula to make a difference and help with the housing, I guess, problem that we're facing today.
Fantastic. Let's put Aaron on the spot.
Well, I think coming from a community development background, I think what I would urge you all to do is just to stay informed of the issue and stay involved. Oftentimes we don't know how we can be productive and how we can help in the solution aspect unless we're engaged along the way. So, participating in community forums, helping us identify the need, being there to share your experience and your story. What was it like for you to seek housing, helping be the voice of the community? Because without the voice of the community, we can't draw that map and we won't know where we need to go. So the city does, I think, what is arguably a fantastic job at asking and engaging and inviting the community. And so take advantage of those opportunities to show up and to share your voice and share the voice of others and encourage your neighbors and people in your life to do the same.
Yeah.
I would echo what Aaron just said, and I'd also say when it comes to affordable housing coming into neighborhoods and shelters or things of that nature, be a voice of the anti-NIMBY. That's it's an interesting thing when you see folks, I totally support this project and it's a great idea to have this, but not right here because it's too close to my house. I don't want it there. The fact is that there's limited space in Missoula and in the surrounding areas, and it has to go someplace. And be a part of the solution rather than a Missoulian commenter.
And my advice is don't read the comments because they're difficult. So for those of you who don't know, NIMBY stands for Not in My Backyard. CAVE stands for Citizens Against Virtually Everything. Ruth.
So they took both of mine. I think the number one answer is just stay involved and be a part of the conversation. Missoula is a place where you can stand up pretty much any time, whether it be at a city council committee meeting or at the actual city council on Monday evenings, and speak your piece. And that can be good and bad. Sometimes it ends with really positive developments or even development plans kind of going down in flames because of that NIMBY mentality. The other thing is just supporting homeownership and taking part in organizations like Homeward that do so much to build homeownership. In the 8 years I've been with the Missoula Organization of Realtors, we've seen homeownership actually become the minority voice in our community. And homeownership or long-term stable housing is what builds volunteerism, it improves parks, it increases voter turnout. These people are invested. So home ownership and accessible housing really, really matters. And it's not just for those who receive a subsidy, but it's also for those who are in market rates. And so I think one of the biggest things we need to do right now is just kind of slow down that median value increase by increasing some supply. So please all sell your houses.
Andrea.
Let's see, in addition to what's been shared, I would encourage you and or your employers to look up the Montana Housing Coalition. The website is mthousingcoalition.org. This will be the third legislative session that a small group of us has gone in front to advocate for policy changes and for funding the Housing Trust Fund. The small group is what the legislature around the state is seeing, and they're saying, well, obviously it must not be an issue. But the reality is, I go around the state all the time, and here in Missoula, and I'm hearing from employers all day long that this is a real economic development issue. And unless we show that we have a wide range of different industries and different folks coming together to recognize this as an issue, our legislators at the state level are not going to pay attention. And we need them to. So again, that's MontanaHousingCoalition.org. Thank you.
Thank you. Adam?
Great answers, and I know many of you are business owners, you work in private business right now, and you're in leadership training, and I'd also encourage you to work on the other side of the equation, which is wages. You know, if you can invest in your business, grow your business, pay your employees better wages, it's a big part of the overall discussion here. And so making those investments in your business really helps, and by that same token, making an investment in housing, in new development, in new subdivision, in these nonprofits, whether it's volunteering time or whatever you can do, I think those are all a really important part.
Rob?
All wonderful advice. I'd encourage you all to advocate with your elected leaders, advocate with city council. Elected leaders do pay attention to business people, and you can help that way.
Thank you, and I will suggest that one of the key things here has been investment, and you can invest in any of a variety of ways, but remember that when you pay that property tax bill, you are making an investment in community. I'm a big believer in local government. It's a place where you can make a difference. It's a place where your vote matters. It's a place where your dollars matter, and it's a place where you can influence policy, make change, and grow community. So think about how you invest in your community, both in terms of your money and your time. And remember, a simple investment for all of you is to vote. Turns out if you think I'm a moron, you can send me packing every 4 years. Or if you think I'm a genius, you can keep me around. Same goes for city council members, for legislators, turns out for senators, Congress members, and the President of the United States. That voting is a big deal, and it's significant, and you are government. We are government, and when we work together, we can make huge change. So, as leaders, I thank you for taking time. This is a big day for you all, and you have been extraordinarily patient sitting in a warm room for 90 minutes without refreshment or bathroom breaks, apparently. So I hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for the opportunity. Thanks again to our panelists for their time.